All right, welcome to Tech Talk number 20. The subject today is monitoring, and it's a spooky edition. We're recording on Halloween. So, with me today, I have Christoph Worm. Christoph is a professional services consultant for TIPCO Jaspersoft based out of Germany. He actually wears many hats in the company, but his primary hat is professional services consultant. Myself, I'm Ernesto Ungaro. I've done all the tech talks, and I'm also a pre-sales consultant in Ireland. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Christoph. He's got some great material for you today and some good demos. So we'll kick it off, Christoph.
Thanks, Ernesto. So let's start with a very simple agenda. So we're going to start with an introduction to monitoring, like some theoretical groundwork, and then we're going to show some demos, a demo of Icinga and Nagios, which is a free monitoring software, and then a demo of New Relic. Let's start with a simple question. First, what is monitoring? Monitoring means watching your system and all its components, kind of checking on their health, so to speak. Now, you could do all of that manually, and nothing is stopping you from doing that, and it makes sense to check your system yourself from time to time to see if everything is running. But as with so many other things in IT, there are, of course, automatic ways of doing that. And later we're going to show some of the softwares that are available for automatic monitoring. One more question at the beginning, why monitor? Well, it's easy. Without it, you don't know what's going on. You don't know if your system is really running. You don't know if your users can work with the system, if your users are happy. So it's always good to monitor your system. Now, what should you monitor? Well, there are several universal things that you should monitor, and there will also be some specific things specific to your situation. One thing that you should always monitor is uptime. Is your system running? Is the hardware running? Is the middleware running, something like the application server if you're using Java? Or is also the software running that's running on your middleware or directly on the operating system? So that's one thing. Another thing, and closely related to that, is availability. Can users access and work with the system? Now, you might think that these two things are the same, and they are often used interchangeably, but they are actually slightly different. A system can be up without being available. So if you only measure uptime, you measure if your system is up, if the hardware, the middleware, the software is up, and if you measure availability, you actually measure if your users can access the system, so if they can get through all of the firewalls, if they can get through your network, if all the and systems in the environment that you need, like authentication and databases, are also running. And it's important to measure both. So if you only monitor uptime, your system might be up, everything might be fine there, but it's not available, your user cannot access it for whatever reason, and that's bad. And if you only measure availability, then you do also kind of measure uptime, but if your system is not available, then you don't really know why. You just know that it's not available, but you don't know if it's really the fault of this one application that you're monitoring that might be up or not, or if it's maybe the fault of some component around it. So it's always important to measure both. Another thing that you should monitor is the performance of your system. Performance means two different things. One, the load, so the number of transactions that goes through your system, or that might also be the CPU load, your memory, your disk, your network utilization. And the second thing is the response time. So how long does it take for one request to come back to the user or to come back to some component that triggered this request? For both, it's important to configure individual thresholds. So while for certain kind of systems, a response time of, let's say, 1 minute might be okay, for other systems where, for example, the user is directly awaiting a response, it might not be okay. So it's also always important to look individually at what you're monitoring and what the thresholds are and what the values should be and what's good and what's bad there. And finally, what you should always think about is what is specific to your application. You should also monitor anything else that makes sense in the given context, so anything that makes sense for your specific case, for your specific application. So for example, if you're monitoring Jaspersoft, there might be things that make sense to monitor there. For example, the number of logged in users or the number of running reports, which does not make sense for other applications. Other applications might not work with users, or they don't have reports that might run. So it wouldn't make sense to measure this with other applications, but it does make sense with Jaspersoft. Next question: how can I monitor? There are two basic ways of monitoring. One of them is passive monitoring. What you do there is you observe what is actually happening in your system. You observe the real requests that are triggered by the users or some other system, and you observe as they go through your system and at the return whether there's an error or not. So you only see what's really there. And the second one is active monitoring. With active monitoring, you're actively sending probes into the system. Probes means synthetic requests. So it's like you make up requests. You construct some requests that you send into the system. But these are like real requests by the users, but they are actually just there to test if everything works in the system and if everything comes back. Now, as before, it's always best to use both. To use passive monitoring and to use active monitoring. That gives you the best view of your whole system. Now, coming back to the question of what exactly to monitor. Gartner is one of the two leading market research companies in IT. It publishes periodic reports about areas of the industry, and one of these reports every year is also about monitoring. And last year, when Gartner looked at monitoring, it defined 5 areas of functionality for monitoring. So they called that the 5 dimensions of APM. Now, APM stands for Application Performance Monitoring, which is just a fancy way of what we're talking about here, so it's monitoring. And they defined these 5 areas of functionality, and I'm just going to quickly go through them. So number 1 is end user experience monitoring. So this is all about looking at things from the user's perspective, looking end to end, looking at the end-to-end performance. What are the response time to the user's requests? Are there any errors coming back? Also check the availability, if the system is running and if the requests from the user are actually answered. This is good for finding compatibility or regional issues, for example. So with this, you can find out if your application maybe has a problem with a certain browser or browser version or an operating system. And with regional issues, you can find out if, for example, your application is slow in, let's say, Canada. End-user experience monitoring is best done as active monitoring. So simulate real users by synthetic requests and see what comes back. But also use passive monitoring, look at what's actually happening, and then look at what you get from that. Mostly you have then a dashboard of where you, for example, have a map of the world and you see the requests being made and you see where there are problems, where it's fast, where it's slow, and you can react to that. The second dimension is application topology, discovery, and visualization. It's quite a mouthful. So what this means is topology would be a map of the hardware and the software components of your system and the connections between them, so the network connections. This is something that most monitoring software does automatically. It updates it automatically. It looks which systems are there. It tries to discover new systems and adds them to the map. And it also usually you have information about the different components. So the basic information would be, is this component up? Can I even reach it? Is it up and running? Is the network in between the components up? So can one component reach the other? And also component details. So if you have, for example, servers that you're monitoring, then you would have information about how's the CPU load, how's the memory doing, the disk, the network, etc. Third dimension is user-defined transaction profiling. So what this means is you're following business transactions through the system. A business transaction is very specific to your situation. So for example, a business transaction might be an order on Amazon. Or if you're talking about Jaspersoft, it might be running a report on the Jasper report server. What you do there is follow the transaction as it goes through the components and along the connections between the components, and you measure, for example, how long did it take to go from one to the other. Or if you have different paths that you can take through the system, for example, because you have a load balancer, you can then also look at where does it route things, where do things go through. The fourth dimension is application component deep dive. So this is all about really not just taking the components as a black box, as we did until now in the past 3 dimensions, but really looking into the components, into the gory details of the components. So this might be, if you have, for example, have an application server, it might be the call stack of the, let's say, the Java application that is running inside inside the server. If you monitor a database server, it might be an SQL query, the SQL queries that are actually executed, and maybe even the results that come back from there. And the fifth dimension is analytics. So with all the data that you have gathered from the past 4 dimensions, you analyze them, you do reporting on top of them, you do data analysis on top of your data to find potential problems, to find patterns, and to react to that. So these are 5 dimensions. Now, depending on the complexity of your system, you don't necessarily have to use all of them, but it makes sense to consider all 5 of them and then decide on a case-by-case basis what you actually need and what is best for your specific use case. And with that, we come to one important difference: monitoring versus diagnostics. Now, this is, as with uptime and availability, these are often used interchangeably, but there are slight differences between them. Monitoring is all about automated gathering of data about a system. So usually there's no human involved. It's a software that is running and that is automatically probing a system either passively or actively and is gathering data about that. And diagnostics is the hands-on analysis of a concrete problem. So you do that if there really is a problem right now and you're analyzing this. Mostly it's done by humans supported by different tools. And with that, I give over to Ernesto for a demo.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that, Christoph. Excellent introduction there. Okay, so we'll pick it up with the fun stuff. I'm going to be getting into more of the practical parts of monitoring Jaspersoft with a few different tools. So you got the philosophy there. Now let's see how to actually do it in the Jaspersoft context. So there's 2 Jaspersoft features that I'm going to talk about. First is the diagnostic report. It gives you a report that you can use for discovering problems. And there's also monitoring via JMX, which gives an interface for monitoring for external tools like Nagios, Icinga, and New Relic. That would be for system admin use. So by default, you have this setting in Jaspersoft, JS diagnostic properties, and you can set this setting, use platform JMX server equals true, and that'll give you kind of an insecure connection into Jaspersoft directly. So what that'll do is it'll enable that JMX interface. Now, by default, if you just connect to JMX running Tomcat, you're only going to get the information that Tomcat exposes, but we actually expose stuff even deeper at the Jaspersoft level. So let's get into what that diagnostic report looks like, just a quick little look at it. It should be installed in every single Jaspersoft instance after 5 point, I want to say 5.0. So here we have the Jasper Report Server Diagnostic Snapshot. So this tells me right now what's happening. Right now I have one user, myself, logged in. The user list is super user. I have 19 users in the system enabled. I have 164 scheduled jobs. Right now I have no running jobs. So this is all super for, getting a snapshot, as it says. What if I want to look at this over time, or as soon as any of these values go up over a certain level, I'd like to get alerted in my monitoring system. So I have, first of all, I need to discover the names of these through JMX. All right, so I have a little tool called JConsole that you should have installed in any Java install that you have. And I can now see my Tomcat instance. So I'm going to connect to it. I'm not doing it through SSL, so that's fine. And I get some basic information: heap memory, number of threads, CPU usage. That's not really important. This isn't like a monitoring tool. It's more of a diagnostic tool. There's a special tab over here called mbeans, and if you've enabled the Jaspersoft connection properly, then you should see one called Jasper Server. And each one of these, for example, if I go into reports and I go into attributes and I see like running asynchronous reports active task count, the value is 0. So this is kind of like one of the ways that I can discover what's available for monitoring. So now I want to take something like users. Okay, so users, attributes, logged in user count. Right now I have one user logged in, myself. If I were to create a new incognito window to create a new tab and just log in as Jasper admin, in theory, when I come back to JConsole and I hit refresh, you see that number now increment to 2. All right, now I'm interested for some reason to look at that value. It's actually a very valuable thing to monitor because, for example, let's say I have a cluster of Jaspersoft servers, and I need to figure out when I'm going to add a new cluster, a new node to my cluster. So right now I have 3 nodes, and each cluster at around 30 concurrent users, I need to add a new server, for example. So there's no great way to know that unless you're actually monitoring it with a tool like what I'll show you next. So the first little demo is coming from Icinga. Icinga is a Nagios fork. Nagios is a popular open source monitoring framework. So I've got under service detail, I've got a Jaspersoft server. It's testing things like current load, current users, those are users logged into the server itself, disk space, the number of processes, all that stuff is being checked. And then I have some specific Jaspersoft things like check number of users. I can click here. It tells me right now I have one user. And if I reschedule the next check of this service, we should see in a second. I should be able to refresh this. We'll go back to service. Yep. So now it's actually in warning. I told it to warn me after I have more than one user. So a warning might have sent out a notification via email to somebody. So that's the idea behind Nagios. It also has something called performance data. Performance data would allow me to capture this over time and chart it. So like I wanted to see how many users I had logged in the last month and what the peak numbers were and that kind of thing. That would be performance data. So let's take a quick look at configuring that. So configuration for this, sorry, we'll go back one. So configuration, I use the check JMX plugin from this website. It's a little bit dated, but it still works. And then I configure a service, and in this case, it's check users. I pass in the port number. I pass in the object name, Jasper server, name equals users. The attribute is logged in users count, and then the username and password. You can configure a different user if you don't want to use super user. That's all in the configuration file. And then -w is warning. So warn me after 1. So yeah, that's all I really had to do. I can show you the little configuration file. So that's going to be here. Anyways, okay, so this configuration file, I'm defining the host, and then I'm defining services for that host. So check memory usage, check users, and all that's coming, it's being mapped from JConsole. Here's a little tricky one. I have -k used in my heap memory usage. This is just a tip for those of you configuring this. So the object is Java lang type equals memory. So if I come back into JConsole, here it is, Java lang memory is the object, attributes, heap memory usage. But I need to call a method called kUsed. So inside of here, it's not very obvious, but I can double click there and I can see used, that value 307, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so like I can monitor that value in Nagios as I'm doing using that command. All right, so let's leave that one alone now, and let's go back to the slides and look at New Relic. New Relic is a little bit different from Nagios or Icinga in that it's hosted on the cloud. You have to pay for the service, or you can use their free edition. Now, the JMX agent only works in the paid editions, just so you know, but you can monitor loads of stuff on the free edition, but if you want to get deeper, like the number of users and all that stuff, they have a configuration file through YAML, through an extension. So in this case, I did Jaspersoft Custom MMX version 1.0 enabled true, and then I expose with a similar syntax user count. Okay, so how does that look inside of New Relic for you New Relic users? So if I go into my application here, I have Jaspersoft server. I also created a custom dashboard called Jaspersoft. I'm just going to create a new one. This is after I configured my YML file and restarted my my Tomcat server. So we'll call this the Tech Talk demo. And let's do, we'll do a grid layout and create. Okay, and welcome to custom dashboards. Okay, add a charter table. Let's do, from my web applications, it's going to find all my agents. It's going to find all my applications. The visualizer, let's do a chart. We'll call it user count. The metrics, so here I have all kinds of things. If I click on CPU, blah, 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 user, but I want to do a custom metric. So if I click on JMX, anything that I exposed on JMX will now be shown here. See all that logged in user count? I didn't have to configure that here. It picked it up. And the value, I'll do an average value for the time being. Y-axis label, we'll say users. So we'll click save and finish. Okay, so for the last 30 minutes, let's click I'm done editing, and okay, so there's my dashboard. I have one user logged in at some moment, so you'll see that update in real time. So you can see how you can add custom things to New Relic from there. Again, my configuration file for that one, straightforward. In my new relic folder, I have an extensions folder and I added this jaspersoft.yml with the information, again, that I gathered from JConsole. Okay, so that is pretty much all we have for you today. Um, so I really recommend that you go through and you set this up for your applications. You can't complain about performance problems without having this set up first. You have to come prepared with facts. You stay ahead of your users. Your users should not be telling you when something's wrong. A system like this should tell you way ahead of any user knowing. It's about staying ahead of the curve. It's a lot easier to answer, a Nagios notification than it is to answer an angry customer that's, you know, saying, hey, what's going on here? You should be monitoring things like memory, things like number of concurrent reports being ran. Those kind of facts are very useful to have. So I just want to thank Christoph again for his great time he put together for this tech talk, and thank you guys for listening. Christoph, I don't know if you have any signing off words there.
Oh, I don't know. Thanks from my side as well.
All right. Thanks,
And
everyone.
do monitoring.
Do monitoring. I like it. Okay. Bye, everyone.